Anyone else? Good day. Being tasked to read the bio on someone I consider my good friend. And my nemesis on Facebook. A native of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, Ms. Oxley has resided in the Bahamas from 1988, when she was contracted by the Ministry of Public Works as an architect. She has worked both in the architectural section as well as in the building survey section, where she was responsible for the restoration works of government-owned buildings in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Ms. Oxley holds a Bachelor of Architecture with cum laude honors and a Master of Science in Architecture, specializing in historic preservation. She received both the degrees at Howard University in Washington, D.C. Because of the nature of her specialization in historic preservation at the Ministry of Works, Ms. Oxley was also seconded to the Antiquities, Monuments, and Museum Corporation. And in 2007, she resigned from the Ministry of Public Works to take up full consultancy work with the AMMC. While there, she continues to consult on occasion with the Ministry of Public Works and the Department of Physical Planning on matters concerning the status of historic resources in the Bahamas and how this relates to the principles, practices, and policies of the AMMC's Act and Regulations. This is Alicia, Oxley.
Good afternoon. It's good to be back home. Once we are the Ministry of Public Works. Today, I'm going to speak as much as is possible. It may seem like a lengthy presentation, but there's so much to capture in a short space of time. I've elected also to do the presentation with a lot of photographs and instead of talking too much. The preamble, as I call it, is just the background of the legislation with the Antiquities, Monuments, and Museum Corporation. The AMMC, as it's called, was legislated in 1998, Chapter 51, and I have a copy of I'm not going to go into detail with the Act or the regulations, but I have a copy that I'm reading with the lecture series personnel. The Act and the regulations were incorporated. The Act was in 1998 and the regulations in 1999. The mission of the AMMC. The AMMC is the Bahamas' principal heritage conservation agency. It's committed to the preservation, interpretation, and promotion of national monuments, historical sites, artifacts, eco-facts, which acquire national importance and inspire public interest by reason of their historical, archaeological, anthropological, and/or paleontological, that's how we always get messed up with, significance. The vision of the AMMC It seeks to foster, promote public stewardship and participation in the care and the management of national historical and cultural resources for the education and enjoyment of residents and visitors. And we say residents and visitors, we have a tendency to say everything is for tourists, We have local tourism as well. So if we don't appreciate what we have, we can't share it with anyone else. Why preserve? Think on these questions. You don't have to answer them now. Many old buildings are protected by law because they are part of a country's history. However, some people think old buildings should be knocked down to make for new ones because people need houses and offices and other residential or facilities, forms of shelter. How important is it to maintain old buildings? Should history stand in the way of progress? And even whilst I was sitting around waiting, there were some questions in conversation that were coming up. These are some of the questions that may come up, but there's a ways no hard and fast, but I went get over beyond myself right now. Okay, one of the things that the corporation does is they have a register. It's an inventory of all historic resources within the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. When I say resources, I don't only mean structures. It could be cemeteries, it could be monuments, it could be a lot of other buildings, it can be structures, right? The National Register is a form that is used to inventory these structures. What qualifies a property for listing? People say 50 years. Not everything that is 50 years is considered, because it has been in that position for 50 years, can be considered to be on the register. However, a property must meet at least one other criteria for evaluation before listing. We talk about historic integrity, historic significance, and historic context. When we speak of the integrity, we speak of the authenticity of the property's historic identity, evidenced by the survival of physical characteristics that existed during the property's historic period through historic qualities, including its location, the materials that were used, the workmanship, the feeling it gives you in the area it is, and by association. And when I say by association, I don't get into it in depth, but if you look at Harbour Island, and you look at Dunmore Town, by association, that could become one of the historic districts due to the structures within that are maintained and form a historic area, a historic district as it's called. Historic significance. Note I said one of the criteria would be other than 50 years. Is the importance of a property to the history, architecture, archaeology, engineering, or culture of a community, island, or the nation. It is achieved in several ways. By association with historic events or activities, association with important persons, distinctive design or physical characteristics, or potential to provide important information. You look at the historic context. Is information about historic trends and properties grouped by an important theme in the history of a community, town, island, or the nation during a particular period of time? And there are a lot of areas within the Commonwealth of the Bahamas that these two characteristics fall within. For instance, it's a pity that it was the building at where Samilo Butler lived in the pond. It was on fire, but that is one of the people, being the first Bahamian Governor General. His building would have been one of the buildings that we would have considered for being on the register. There are incentives also, and I'll get into more detail with this. Incentives for maintaining your historic structures, right? We have tax exemptions, which I'll get into more detail, and also the plaquing of these resources. So if you have in your community, a body that uses their community for, say, tours or anything like that, it can be highlighted that this property is on the register. Real property and duty-free exemptions. Ministry of Finance, in conjunction with the Antiquities Corporation, affords owners of structures of historic value real property tax for 20 years, as well as duty-free tax exemption for the restoration within 20 years. We get applications that come in not only for restoration, but they want to upgrade the kitchen and bring in a stove and bring in all these different things. Unless they bring it in historic, antique, and could say that it replicates something that has been there. And some of these things you find in photographs. If you have historic photographs within your family that go on from generation to generation. So it's not difficult, but I'll get into more detail with that later. Then why restore? Incorporating the old with the new. Downtown the Church and Avenue building, I've heard on and off that they plan to demolish, and then they say, you know, we don't have to demolish, there's a way in which we could construct within, or it costs money. Everything is costly, right? But maintaining the image of the downtown area, there are ways in which the facades can be kept. And I will show you examples of this. This is in Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, D.C. You have the row houses that were maintained and the structure at the back of it. They were able to maintain the historic facade and still utilize areas or construct a building that married, as it were, the facade of the historic facade. And this one I have to bring into consideration too. I'm from Trinidad, and the firehouse in Port of Spain, downtown, it was superimposed with the National Library of Information System, NALIS. And there they marry together and they work together. All right? The scale also is important. Okay, I believe that's part one. Part two, an example of the collaboration between the Ministry of Works and the Antiquities Corporation. This deals with a situation that we had with Pompeii Museum, beginning from the 1990s up until recently. Okay? In the 1990s, I had worked with the Ministry of Works at that time, and the Department of Archives were given, after BEC had moved to Blue Hill Road, they had been given the building that BEC had occupied originally to become Pompeii Museum. Okay, a history that is Pompeii Museum, the Museum of Slavery and Emancipation. We had to do research, and the research here shows that where Pompeii Museum existed as venue house as far back as on a map in 1770. What all this is saying is that we don't just take up and start doing restoration work without doing background. Okay? And some of the background even helps us. Later on you would see some of the things we found. When the sea line was right up to what is Bay Street, venue house existed. In 1788, venue house could be seen on the waterfront at George Street. In 1891, on reclaimed land on Prince George Wharf. Familiar historic views of Venue House. The original is said that's an artistic illustration of the one on the left, the one from George Street, and even from the famous Columbus statue, or infamous, as Gerard might say. Looking towards the Venue House, you can see it, right? Down to the end. You have the cathedral, the Anglican Cathedral as well. Bahamas Electricity Corporation and Telephone and Telegraph Department once occupied that structure from 1913 to 1986. And in 1992, it was restored as the Pompey Museum of Slavery and Emancipation. It was opened by Governor General Sir Clifford Darling and Lady Darling, and the then Prime Minister, Mr. Hubert Ingram and Mrs. Ingram. Then disaster struck. Everybody remembers that famous fire, the Darrell Miller fire. Where the straw market goes. During the fire, some of the embers fell on the roof of Pompey Museum, and the REDPF and the volunteers were able to at least remove some of the artifacts and the exhibits. Fire damage in the end, this is what it looked like. The roof, where the embers fell, and the inside, the roof and ceiling was damaged by fire as well as from water during the containment of the fire. In 1992, we restored, that was the original design on your left. You would notice the staircase has a straight run on the lower elevation. And I'm only showing you these things to show how we have to make accommodations for other uses, especially in a tight-knit area as in downtown Nassau. In 2004, the straw market was pitched at the back at what is now Pompey Square. And the fence was put right up against the Pompey Museum. So we had to have access to the upper floor, and it just shows the difference where we had to change the direction of the side staircase. All these things are things that accommodate the use of a building, a historic structure, particularly in an urban area. Restoration again was completed in 2004, and you would notice at that time we had, okay, from originally in 1992, when we went in, the building had no access between the upper floor and the lower floor except on the exterior. We created an internal access using the spiral staircase. And not everybody is good with spiral staircases, but at least we didn't have to go out into the rain or into any foul weather to go upstairs in time of need. However, we use the outside staircases for delivery, etc. And some of the ways it was laid out, the adaptive reuse of the space for the exhibits, the type of exhibits we had, it was an open concept. The only thing is that the structure was designed at 2 different levels of the lower floor. So there were connections between the 2 levels having access for disabled as well. So we had a ramp in between. Okay, and then we had to add lighting and all these different things. You would notice there's a mural on the bottom photograph. This mural had been salvaged from, I think it's either the Churchill or Avenue building. I once had a bank in there, and we were able to salvage that mural and exhibit within the Pompey Museum. Sadly though, we lost it in the next fire. Disaster strikes again on Friday, December 2nd, 2011. This time it was destroyed and the damage was horrendous. These are some pictures of the damage. You can see totals, and we have been advised that on both occasions, it was arson. Right? First one was a disgruntled store market vendor, and the second one was still up and up in the air. This is what it looked like on the interior. I hope you all seen it clearly as I seen it on my screen. Okay, that was the rear, that's the part that faces what is now Pompey Square. Stabilizing and rebuilding. We have been mandated to rebuild the structure, to restore the structure. Of course, we have to use the safety as expected in all buildings, although I don't see much of it going on every time. But at least as government entities, we comply. Then the rebuilding starts. Stabilizing of the exterior walls, because what we did, we were able to keep the exterior walls, but we introduced structural members on the inside and tied the walls into the structural members. Here you see the upper floor going in. That blockwork in the corner there. We have disabled access to the upper floor. And what we did to we redesigned the area, and what, as I mentioned earlier, we had 2 levels on the ground floor. We were able to have a continuous level, 1 level on the ground floor. What that enables us to do, or the curator of the museum to do, to have more flexibility in laying out the exhibits. The lower floor, and the engineer for that is is now in private practice, but is also someone who passed through the doors of the Ministry of Public Works. The lower floor again, that's the restoration room. You can see the soot on the walls and everything. The upper floor, now we had stabilized the concrete floor. We were able to be more flexible in our design. Initially, we had a wooden floor on the upper floor. So what we have done now is to have concrete floors on both floors, but we have finished them with wooden floors to replicate what was there before. I mentioned at one time that the Bay Street had been the boundary, and Venue House, which I didn't mention, was a slave market. It was the market at the time. When we were doing the excavation for the columns, these are some of the fragments we found, of bottles and stones and pottery and everything, right? Within the foundation of the steel. And like the mythical phoenix rising out of the ashes, this is Pompey Museum today. Okay? Lately, Alive had come together with Pompey Museum and with murals depicting slavery and some of the African symbolism on the building. And it's operation today. This is one of the exhibits, and you would see on the floor plan that it has a floor plan to the left of the lower floor. It shows an entire open space, except in the right-hand corner where we have the circulation. You would say, okay, there are no bathrooms in there. The Pompey Square persons, the committee there, the organization, we had made arrangements with them that Pompey Museum would be a part of Pompey Square. So at least we were able to use our space more fully on the lower floor. On the upper floor, we do have a cubicle a unisex cubicle, disabled friendly, and classrooms and offices. Now we go into part 3. How can you get involved? What incentives are there? It's still part of part 2. I've shown this, the incentives being on the Ministry of Finance, getting your exemptions, as well as the plaquing. I bought one of the plaques for you to see what it looks like. Once your eligibility has been confirmed within the AMMC for being on the register. Arguably, economic benefits of historic preservation. It's a powerful economic engine, an effective tool to revitalize neighborhoods and older communities. And in a case like this, I would think of what is going on with the urban renewal project right now in the Queenstown, Grantstown area. And that is not to isolate any one area, but that is one that is on the news more often. It creates jobs. In coming here, I was passing through, they closed off Ross Corner to pave, and I decided to pass through one of Fitz Lane and New Street. And I see a lot of homes being rebuilt. Right? Hopefully, they're wooden homes, and maybe they were part of the urban renewal effort that is going on. But it's good to see the areas like that being commissioned as such, or construction going on with it. How can you get involved? Who can get involved? You can, and your community can. And now I'll make a plug, not necessarily for those technical persons, but for persons who live in communities where there's a lot of history that you don't really look at. You take for granted. Right? In the areas where you live, you may take a lot of things for granted. Some of you come from the Family Islands as well, and have homes in the Family Islands. We at Antiquities Corporation had an encounter with the people of Harbor Island, right? A very good encounter, because what it did, it opened the minds of the people to remember and to think about their history. And one of the things is, you would find that there are older persons who have a lot of stories to tell. Communities can come together and start recording, right? I always say there's his story, her story, and the true story. History, and the true story. Engaging communities in identifying heritage spaces within their communities. Historic preservation is beneficial to the community in the following ways: culturally, economically, socially, developmentally, environmentally, and educationally. I leave that slide up a little. You all can see it, right? Socially, I look at socially, a commonly benefits when citizens take pride in its history and mutual concern for the protection of the historic building fabric. Environmentally, a community benefits when historic buildings are restored or rehabilitated rather than demolished and disposed of in the community landfill. And I always say, sometimes I look at the destruction of a lot of the history here in downtown. Okay? Not only downtown, throughout the island. And I always say, those people in the dump must be rich. Because the Abaco pine goes there. We go back, and now we go to a premier one, is not to plug any hardware stores. And we buy lumber. We don't treat the ground, the next thing you know, termites, whatever, right? When we did balcony house a long time ago when I first came here, the termites had eaten the Abaco pine till it